In 1932, a salt barrel and $2 of cure preserved enough pork to feed a family of 6 through winter. By 1948, that same practice carried a $500 fine. The official reason was public safety. But when historians pulled the original drafting records, the statute's language mirrored, almost word for word, internal memos from the meat-packing corporations that profited once families stopped preserving their own food. Your grandparents used 25 low-cost preservation methods that made them independent of any store or supply chain. Everyone has since been restricted, regulated, or effectively banned. The exposed trail behind who really outlawed them begins with salt and smoke. A salt barrel in the corner of a Pennsylvania Dutch cellar, 1932. For the price of $2 and a handful of labor, a family could layer pork slabs with coarse salt, pack them tight in a timber barrel, and seal away months of meat against the cold. No refrigeration, no factory label, just salt, time, and a cool, dark place. In Tennessee, the smokehouse stood behind nearly every farmhouse. Hickory logs smoldered low, filling the air with phenolic smoke that clung to hams and shoulders. Over days, the meat darkened, dried, and took on the tang of wood and fire. The process was simple, but the chemistry was precise. Salt pulled water from the flesh, lowering its activity until bacteria could no longer grow, while smoke deposited natural antimicrobials that kept rot and mold at bay. The cost was almost nothing. That year, a 50-pound sack of salt sold for 25 cents. The barrel, reused each year, was a one-time investment. The smokehouse, built from local timber, could last a generation. Families butchered together, curing enough pork to last until spring. According to Nebraska and North Carolina State University food science studies, a 3% salt cure reduces E. coli by over 99%, and traditional cold smoking cuts Clostridium spores by 2 orders of magnitude, results that rival or surpass modern preservatives. But by 1948, these homegrown methods had become a legal trap. County ordinances, drafted with language lifted directly from meat-packing industry memos, outlawed barrel curing and unlicensed smokehouses. The County Meat Processing Act imposed fines up to $500 for any uninspected dry cure, while new Environmental Protection Agency emission standards made backyard smokehouses technically illegal in most towns. The American Meat Institute and National Smokehouse Association lobbied for these rules, arguing in closed-door sessions that every home-cured ham was a lost sale for their members. Their lobbying records, preserved in Senate Agriculture Committee files, show calculated efforts to tie public health to commercial gain. Modern science has since confirmed what those families knew by feel. Properly salted and smoked meat is not just safe, but often superior in nutrient retention and shelf life to its factory-processed descendants. Yet the law stands. The knowledge that once made a family independent, how to turn a hog into a winter's worth of meals with nothing but salt and wood smoke, now carries the risk of prosecution. The story of salt and smoke is not just about food. It is about the quiet, deliberate dismantling of self-reliance, replaced by a system that rewards dependency and punishes the memory of sovereignty. In 1910, a farmhouse blueprint sketched out a root cellar beneath packed earth, where cold and darkness preserved food without a single wire or motor. Potatoes, carrots, and apples rested in bins, kept at a steady 40 degrees by the ground itself. Cornell University Food Science Lab proved that even 100 years later, a cellar kept water activity in potatoes below 0.95, enough to stop Clostridium botulinum in its tracks. The only investment was a shovel and the will to dig. But the Food Safety Modernization Act of 2011 changed the rules, demanding commercial refrigeration for year-round storage. GEA refrigeration helped draft the language, and fines back up the mandate. In 2017, a Minnesota family selling cellar carrots at a local market was hit with a $500 citation. State code echoed industry white papers, warning that uncontrolled environments were a contamination risk, erasing the memory of generations who survived on cellar produce before the first home fridge. In the pantry, EGGS floated in jars of water glass, liquid sodium silicate, a staple by 1935. For less than a dime, a quart of water glass sealed dozens of eggs, keeping yolks firm and whites clear for months. University of Minnesota researchers in the 1940s confirmed that eggs stored this way stayed safe from salmonella for up to 9 months. Today, the FDA Egg Products Inspection Act and state codes call glass eggs adulterated, banning their sale and imposing fines. The Egg Farmers Association lobbied for these rules, arguing in congressional hearings that uninspected preservation threatened industry standards. Their campaign literature, archived in the National Agricultural Library, painted home-preserved eggs as a public health threat, even as studies show alkaline storage blocks pathogens more effectively than many commercial washes. In the larder, pork chops and sausage vanished under a layer of rendered lard in a stoneware chest. The fat cooled and hardened, sealing out air and spoilage. Tufts University Nutrition Lab found that meats sealed in lard keep more omega-3 fatty acids and suffer less oxidation than plastic-wrapped versions. In 1928, the only cost was time spent rendering fat from the family hog. Now, the FDA Food Code of 1995 and state adulterated meat laws ban lard sealing outside licensed plants. The National Lard Producers Council pushed for these bans, aiming to boost demand for packaged meats. What once let a matriarch fill her shelves with safe, homemade food now risks a fine and a cease and desist letter. In 1949, a pamphlet landed on kitchen tables across the Midwest, stamped with the seal of the National Canners Association. The headline warned in bold type, "Home canning, a hidden danger." The language inside echoed a new refrain: only factory-sealed jars could guarantee safety. But the words were not the product of neutral science. Ball Corporation's internal memos, now preserved in the Indiana State Library, reveal a deliberate campaign. One memo, dated April 14, 1951, lays out the plan. Coordinate with the Senate Agriculture Committee to advance model code language, emphasize public health, and undercut home preservation. Ann Mendelsohn, in her exhaustive study of food safety politics, traced the fingerprints of the Canned Goods Alliance, a coalition led by Ball, Armour, and Campbell's, across every major food code revision from 1940 to 1960. Senate Agriculture Committee hearing transcripts from 1952 capture Ball executives testifying that unregulated home preservation creates a public health hazard that undermines consumer confidence in commercially processed foods. The phrasing in county ordinances, hazardous, uninspected, potentially adulterated, matches draft language circulated in Ball's own lobbying files. These were not warnings born from outbreaks or new science, but from market calculus. Every ham cured in a family's barrel, every bushel canned in a home kitchen, was a sale lost to the factories. Industry-funded pamphlets flooded women's magazines and church bulletins. Canning is not a kitchen. Science, declared a 1939 National Canners Association booklet distributed through the U.S. Public Health Service. The pamphlet cited FDA outbreak statistics, but the underlying data came from industry-commissioned studies. Meanwhile, County boards adopted ordinances that mirrored trade association drafts almost word for word. Detroit, Chicago, and Los Angeles banned home canned goods from public markets, citing research prepared by the National Canners Association. State legislatures, under pressure from the American Meat Packers Association, required that all pork sold in urban counties be processed in USDA-inspected plants, effectively outlawing backyard butchering and barrel curing. Behind closed doors, the Ball archives show, executives calculated the return on lobbying investment. A 1953 memo estimates that every $10,000 spent on public education and legal advocacy would secure an additional $1.2 million in revenue by shrinking the market for home-preserved food. The pattern is unmistakable. The very industries that profited from dependency wrote the rules that criminalized independence. The public health rationale was a mask. The true motive was profit. Modern science has since dismantled the industry's core claim. Peer-reviewed studies from the University of Nebraska and North Carolina State University confirm that traditional salt curing and smoke preservation, when properly executed, rival or surpass commercial methods in both safety and nutrient retention. Yet the bans remain. The language of protection was a smokescreen for a transfer of power from the hands of families to the boardrooms of corporations. The Ball memos, the Senate testimony, and the code books all tell the same story. Self-reliance was not outlawed by accident. It was erased by design. A cedar kraut barrel in the back shed, Pennsylvania, 1890. Cabbage, salt, and thyme. No factory starter. No plastic liner. Grandparents shredded cabbage by hand, layered it with salt in a 15-gallon barrel, and pressed it down with a wooden disc. The lactic acid bacteria living on the cabbage leaves took over, dropping the pH to a level where E. coli and salmonella could not survive. For less than $1 in salt and the price of a barrel, often handed down for decades, a family could preserve enough sauerkraut to last the winter. Modern meta-analyses from the University of Maryland confirm that wild fermentation in these crocks reduces pathogens by over 99%, while boosting vitamin C and delivering live probiotics absent from pasteurized jars. By the 2010s, federal and state codes branded home-fermented kraut as potentially hazardous unless made in a licensed facility. The Food Safety Modernization Act of 2011, drafted in part with input from the Canned Cabbage Coalition and the National Canners Association, requires that any fermented vegetable sold at market must be processed in a certified kitchen with batch pH logs and annual inspections. Fines for unlicensed sales can reach $1,000 per violation, as documented in North Carolina and Minnesota state health code enforcement records. Trade association lobbying files preserved in the National Agricultural Library show industry strategists arguing that every crock of homemade kraut was a threat to canned sauerkraut sales. Their memos, dated 2010, outline a campaign to tie unregulated fermentation to food-borne illness outbreaks, despite the lack of supporting epidemiological data. Upstairs, in the attic of a 1940s farmhouse, wild herbs hung from twine stretched between rafters. Sage, mint, and calendula dried in the open air, preserved by low humidity and time. The only cost was a handful of string and a season's patience. Today, state health codes in places like California and New York prohibit the sale of home-dried herbs unless processed in a licensed facility, citing risk of contamination. The American Herbal Products Association lobbied for these restrictions, aiming to protect the commercial supplement market from backyard competition. Yet laboratory analyses published in 2021 show that AIR-dried herbs retain more phytochemicals and antioxidants than many mass-produced irradiated counterparts. Both the kraut barrel and the attic rack were acts of microbial guardianship, low-cost, resilient, and fiercely independent. Each method kept families fed and healthy without a dollar spent on factory food. The laws that now ban these practices did not arise from science, but from a deliberate transfer of power, from the hands of the self-reliant to the ledgers of the regulated. In 1914, a cast-iron kettle, blackened by years of use, stood ready in the backyard. Hog butchering day began before sunrise, scraping, cutting, and rendering every part of the animal. Fat from bellies and backs was chopped and tossed into the kettle, melting down over a wood fire. The liquid lard was strained, poured into stoneware crocks, and sealed tight. A winter's supply for frying, baking, and soap, earned with sweat and wood. A 1936 Iowa farm diary records rendered 40 pounds of lard, enough for the year, sold none. The home butchering economy thrived on whole animal use. Chops, hams, and shoulders might be salted or smoked, but the real energy came from the fat, always rendered at home. The cost was a hog raised on scraps, a borrowed kettle, and a day's labor. There was no factory, no packaging, no inspection sticker. But by the 1950s, the rules began to change. The 1954 Federal Meat Inspection Act, pushed by the American Meat Institute and the National Lard Producers Council, made it illegal to sell or even share home-rendered lard or backyard butchered meat without USDA inspection. The 1968 Wholesome Meat Act extended these requirements to every state, forcing all meat and rendered fats for sale, even at county fairs or church suppers, through licensed, inspected facilities. Public health was the official reason. But industry memos in Senate Agriculture Committee files reveal the real motive. Every pound of home-rendered fat was a pound not bought from packing plants. A 1955 AMI briefing stated, "Unregulated lard depresses market prices. Uniform inspection will eliminate this leakage." Recent research has come full circle. A 2023 fatty acid analysis found that traditionally rendered lard from pastured hogs holds more omega-3 fatty acids and vitamin D than commercial shortenings. Slow rendering over low heat preserves nutrients that industrial hydrogenation destroys. Yet the law remains. The backyard butcher, once a symbol of rural resilience, now faces fines for the same work that once fed generations. What cost a day's labor and a borrowed kettle now demands a factory and a license. In 1919, an oak barrel in an orchard shed filled with apple scraps, peels, cores, bruised fruit became the farm's vinegar vat. Water covered the waste, and wild yeasts and acetic acid bacteria, clinging to every apple, set to work. Weeks passed. The result was a sharp, golden vinegar drawn off by the orchard keeper to pickle vegetables, preserve relishes, and scrub dairy pails. No purchased cultures, no sterile tanks, no factory labels, just patience and the labor of gathering. Farm diaries from Pennsylvania and Ohio list vinegar barrels alongside root cellars and smokehouses, as necessary as salt or lard. Across the yard, a stoneware crock sat by the hearth. Raw milk left in a cool corner thickened overnight into clobber. The dairymaid skimmed cream for butter, then spooned the clabbered milk into a fresh crock. Lactic acid bacteria native to the milk and air soured it gently, dropping the pH and thickening the curds. This was breakfast, cheese starter, and baking base. No pasteurizer, no refrigeration, no purchased starter. The only costs were a cow's daily yield and a crock, replaced when it cracked with age. By the mid-20th century, regulators turned their attention to these living ferments. The 1947 Federal Food Quality Statute labeled uncontrolled fermentation a risk, and the 1963 USDA Acidified Foods Rule required vinegar and fermented dairy sold at market to be pasteurized or made in licensed facilities. The American Vinegar Institute and National Dairy Council lobbied for these rules, citing the need for uniformity and safety. Their memos, preserved in Senate Agriculture Committee files, argued that every home barrel and crock was a lost sale. Control the microbe, control the market. Modern research challenges this logic. A 2020 review in the Journal of Applied Microbiology finds traditional apple vinegar fermented with wild cultures suppresses pathogens more effectively than many commercial blends. Lactic fermented clobber, according to a 2022 nutrition study, delivers live probiotics and higher vitamin retention than pasteurized yogurts. Yet the law stands. The knowledge that turned waste into nourishment is now regulated out, replaced by sterile retail jars and cartons. In 2012, the Journal of Food Science published a sweeping review that put old kitchen wisdom under the microscope of modern science. Dozens of peer-reviewed studies were pooled and analyzed, testing everything from barrel-fermented kraut to attic-dried herbs. The results were emphatic. Across hundreds of trials, traditional fermentation cut foodborne pathogens by up to 4 log units, 99.99%, without synthetic chemicals or factory interventions. Wild lactic acid bacteria, the same strains that thrived in a cedar kraut barrel or a milk crock, produced natural antimicrobials and probiotics now recognized for supporting gut health and immune function. NIH-funded research confirmed that these live cultures, absent from pasteurized or canned products, not only inhibit E. coli and salmonella, but also boost micronutrient retention, especially vitamin C and B vitamins, compared to their sterilized, shelf-stable descendants. The same meta-analysis found that air-dried herbs, when handled with basic cleanliness, preserved more antioxidants and volatile oils than irradiated commercial powders. Smokehouse meats tested in university labs retained higher omega-3 fatty acids and less oxidation than vacuum-packed deli slices. Root-cellared vegetables kept at 40 degrees showed lower spoilage rates and higher vitamin content than those shipped in refrigerated trucks. In every case, the evidence echoed what generations already knew. These techniques worked, and worked well, because they harnessed natural barriers, acidity, salt, dryness, cold, and beneficial microbes that modern processing often strips away. What cost a few dollars and a barrel now requires a licensed facility, batch logs, and regulatory approval. Yet the evidence is clear. Properly executed home preservation, as practiced by grandmothers and grandfathers, delivers safety, nutrition, and resilience that rivals or outperforms many industrial methods. The laboratory bench has vindicated the cellar, the smokehouse, and the pantry shelf. The only thing missing is the freedom to use them without fear of penalty. In the loft of a 1922 Iowa barn, corn cobs dried on wire racks, their kernels hardening in the heat. Below, a hand-cranked mill from 1899 sat ready to grind those kernels into meal or grits. Beans such as navy, pinto, and kidney hung from twine, curing in the dry air until their pods rattled. These simple acts, drying, shelling, grinding, formed the backbone of the rural pantry, providing carbohydrates and protein through sun, wind, and patience. For the price of a few seeds and an $8 mill, a family could secure a year's food, buffered against failed harvests and empty shelves. Drying corn and beans was more than thrift. It was a claim to independence. Grandparents shelled corn by hand, ground it fresh for bread or mush, and soaked beans for stews that lasted through winter. Spoilage came only from a missed patch of mold or a mouse. Rutgers and Iowa State studies in the 1940s found that beans dried below 13%. Moisture kept their protein and resisted spoilage for years. Dried corn, ground as needed, held onto vitamin E and B complex nutrients far better than store-bought flour. By the mid-1960s, new rules changed everything. The USDA grain handling standards, drafted in 1963 and revised in 1967, required that dried grains and beans sold at market pass through licensed, inspected facilities. The Corn Processor Alliance and the National Dry Bean Council pushed for these standards, calling home-dried crops an adulteration risk and a threat to their supply chain. Senate Agriculture Committee archives hold their memos. Every bushel dried in a family loft was one not bought from their members. Modern research confirms the old ways. A 2020 Rutgers analysis found sun-dried, home-milled corn preserves more complex starches and micronutrients than industrial meal. A 2019 Iowa State study showed beans dried and stored by traditional methods kept up to 98% of their protein and minerals after 2 years. The cost was a few hours of labor and a rack in the loft. The law required a license, a facility, and a fee. A sheet of muslin stretched across a wooden frame, 1930. In the heat of July, an orchard mother in California mashed windfall plums, spread the pulp thin, and left it to dry in the sun. No sugar, no pectin, no gas bill, just sunlight and patience. By week's end, the leathery sheets rolled up tight, packed into tins, and vanished into school satchels or lunch pails as snacks. The cost was a few cents for muslin, and fruit that would have rotted on the ground. A 1930 bulletin from UC Davis called these fruit leathers a safe, shelf-stable way to preserve vitamins A and C, with water activity so low that spoilage bacteria could not survive. In 1941, a WPA instructor in Oklahoma taught farm families to slice squash, string it onto racks, and let the prairie sun do the work. Solar trays, built from scrap lumber and window screen, could dry a bushel of vegetables for pennies. The only energy used was the sun. CSU extension guides from the era praised solar drying for keeping nutrients locked in, and Rutgers research found that sun-dried vegetables retained more beta-carotene than most canned or frozen produce. On the Gulf Coast, a fisherman in 1912 built a rack from driftwood, split mullet, and hung them over a smoky fire of oak and palmetto. The heat and smoke cured the fish in a day, sealing in omega-3 fatty acids and flavor. No refrigeration, no tin cans, just skill and timing. Modern studies confirm that hardwood smoke deposits phenols and aldehydes that act as natural antimicrobials, reducing listeria and salmonella to undetectable levels. But by the 1970s and 80s, these zero-fuel methods collided with a new set of codes. The FDA fruit roll regulations, written with input from snack food giants, banned unlicensed fruit leathers from markets and schools. State solar drying guidelines, drafted with help from the solar panel industry, required commercial-grade dryers and temperature logs. The Federal Fish Safety Code, shaped by commercial canners, outlawed home-smoked fish for sale, citing uneven dehydration. Each rule carried fines, enforcement, and the quiet erasure of household independence. Today, peer-reviewed studies from UC Davis and Rutgers confirm what those grandparents already knew. Sun, sugar, and smoke create food that is safe, nutritious, and shelf-stable, without a single watt from the grid. The knowledge that once let a family turn waste into wealth now sits behind a wall of regulation, priced and packaged by the same industries that lobbied to outlaw it. A quart jar of honey, sealed in 1937, sat undisturbed on a Missouri pantry shelf. Inside, apple slices and wild blackberries floated in syrup, preserved for years without added sugar or a dime spent on factory canning. Honey's secret lies in its low water activity and natural hydrogen peroxide, blocking bacteria and mold more effectively than most commercial preservatives. Research from the National Institutes of Health confirms what beekeepers have long claimed. Raw, unheated honey suppresses E. coli and Staphylococcus aureus, making it a natural shield against spoilage. For families with a hive and a stove, surplus fruit became winter's treat. No label, no license, just tradition. In 1926, a Pennsylvania grandmother poured hot beeswax over jars of pickled beets and green beans. As the wax cooled, it formed a tight, glossy seal that kept out air and moisture. No metal lids, no rubber gaskets, just the byproduct of a summer's honey harvest. Oregon State University research shows beeswax coatings limit oxygen and moisture transfer, rivaling many commercial vacuum seals. This method cost nothing but a bit of saved wax. Yet today, United States Department of Agriculture rules ban home canned goods sealed with wax from sale, citing inconsistent barrier formation. The Candle Manufacturers Association, eager to protect the paraffin and synthetic wax market, lobbied for these restrictions in the 1950s. Their memos, still in state archives, warn that unregulated wax sealing undermines consumer trust in commercial packaging. On the prairie in 1934, a hunter sliced venison thin, salted it, and hung the strips over a campfire. Smoke and dry air turned wild game into jerky that lasted for months. No nitrate, no refrigeration, no factory bag. Modern Oregon State University research finds that jerky dried below a water activity of 0.75 is shelf-stable and resists bacteria as well as commercial snacks. Yet the Food Safety Modernization Act dried meat rule now prohibits home-cured jerky sales without a licensed facility and batch testing. Every strip made at home is a sale lost to industry. Nature's preservatives, honey, wax, smoke, and sun once stretched a harvest for pennies. Today, each is fenced in by codes written for profit, not safety. A potato mound in January, Pennsylvania, 1905. A cellar steward, sleeves rolled, shovels earth over burlap sacks filled with last autumn's harvest. The method is simple. Dig a shallow pit, layer straw, stack potatoes, cover with more straw and soil. The ground's steady chill keeps the tubers firm, the darkness halts sprouting, and the cost is measured in sweat, not dollars. A few cents for burlap, a day's labor for a winter's worth of starch. An 1885 recipe for barrel pickles sits nearby, stained with vinegar rings. Cucumbers, onions, and green beans, packed in hand-soured apple vinegar and salt, are sealed in stoneware jars. The acid halts bacteria. The salt draws out water, creating a brine where only lactic acid bacteria can thrive. Grandparents checked the pickles by taste and scent, not by pH meter, but modern University of Florida research confirms that a pH below 4.6, easily reached in these crocks, blocks botulism and E. coli as effectively as factory controls. Today, the USDA acidified foods rule and state statutes ban barrel pickles and root-cellared potatoes from public sale unless processed in licensed, temperature-monitored facilities. The Pickle Packers International Association and the Frozen Potato Council lobbied for these mandates, arguing that home-preserved roots and pickles threatened their market share. Their memos, filed with the FDA in 1982, called for uniform acidity and cold chain compliance to drive out unregulated sellers. Yet Penn State's 2021 sprout inhibition study proves that earth-banked potatoes suffer less rot and nutrient loss than those shipped in refrigerated trucks. The cellar steward and the pickle maker, once the backbone of family survival, are now fenced out by codes that privilege industry over independence. A crock of sourdough starter, alive since 1902, sat on the kitchen counter in a Nebraska farmhouse. Each morning, a handful of flour and water fed the bubbling mass, kept alive by wild yeasts and lactobacilli. This living dough leavened bread for generations, costing nothing but a scoop of grain and a little patience. The starter's tang came from its microbes, organisms now catalogued by scientists at Copenhagen and Columbia as vital for producing organic acids that break down phytic acid, unlocking minerals and boosting digestibility. In the next room, a stock pot simmered with bones and scraps, transforming leftovers into bone broth. The 1911 edition of the Boston Cooking School Cookbook called for hours of slow boiling to extract gelatin, calcium, and trace minerals. The only price was a bit of fuel and time. Modern research confirms that bone broth, rich in collagen and amino acids, delivers nutrients in forms more absorbable than many commercial supplements. Yet by the late 1980s and the 1990s, purity laws and shelf stability regulations swept through state and federal codes. The Food and Drug Administration, Yeast Culture Regulation, and the Food Safety Modernization Act shelf stable. Broth rule, both shaped by bread manufacturers and the soupcon industry, banned the sale of unpasteurized starters and home-canned broths at markets. The justification was safety, and the effect was to force families to buy sterile bread and boxed stock. The living foods that once made a home resilient, sourdough and bone broth, were pushed out by rules written for profit, not nourishment. The science now vindicates what grandmothers always knew. A bubbling starter and a pot of bones do more for independence than any factory loaf or can. In 1967, the text of the Federal Food Code revision landed on the desk of the Department of Agriculture. The author line was blank, but the draft itself, docket number 6012A, had been written by the very trade associations it claimed to regulate. Internal memos from the American Meat Institute and the National Canning Association, later released under the Freedom of Information Act, reveal that the regulated wrote the rules, submitting them as agency proposals. The effect was sweeping. Every home barrel, smokehouse, and cellar that once shielded a family from hunger now fell under codes crafted in boardrooms. Today, private food preservation at home remains legal, so long as it is not shared, sold, or bartered. But the moment a jar, slab, or dried rack leaves the homestead, the law steps in. The 2022 REI study found that families who preserve their own food can cut grocery bills by 30%, reclaiming both nutrition and independence. Yet the system is built to funnel every transaction through a licensed processor, a grocery aisle, a barcode. A new generation of homesteaders is quietly reclaiming 3 of these banned methods: fermentation, root cellaring, and lard sealing, within the boundaries of private use. Their actions are not protest, but a call for sovereignty. The proof sits in the docket files and the science. What was once outlawed for profit now stands vindicated by research and by the quiet defiance of those who refuse dependency. The law may demand compliance, but the memory of independence persists, waiting for the next hand to reach for the barrel, the cellar, or the crock. Today, most families can't preserve food without store-bought kits or government-approved instructions, and that's no accident. Industry lobbying and regulatory barriers have severed the link between ordinary people and their own food security. Modern science now affirms what those old cellars and salt barrels proved. Self-sufficiency worked. As dependency deepens, the real loss isn't just forgotten skills. It's the surrender of control over what keeps us alive. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.